Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to Reading Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws. Today we're looking at Book 14, which is the first chapter, book of Part 3, which deals with the issues of climate. The Book 3 is composed of books 14 through 19, so 5 books. No, 6 books, sorry, 14, 15, 16, 17. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. If book 1 begins on climate, the issue is climate, we start to see the environment, the role of the environment that has on the shape of government. So let's look at it right away. I hope I can get this done today because I have other things to do, and we'll see what happens. Chapter 1, the general idea. If it is true that the character of the spirit and the passions are the heart of are extremely different in the various climates. So, if it is true that the character and the spirit, right, and the passions of the heart are extremely different in different climates, laws should be relative to the difference of these passions and these difference of these characters. In other words, this is the argument that human beings in the environment, their given environment, do the climates of these environments, will play a role in the shaping of character, shaping of political institutions. This is biopolitics. This is the biopolitics dimension of Montesquieu here. And this is the controversial thing. Some people argue, oh, he's a determinist on this. No, he's just saying that what he's saying here, given that climate, and therefore the climate, is going to, does it have an impact? If climate has an impact on human behavior, and that means their spirit of people, the period, how people's spirit, people's character, right, and their heart, the passions, right, then it will shape the laws. The laws will be relative to different climates. So that's the point he's making here in chapter. That's the whole general idea of the book. Chapter 2: How much men differ in varying climates. Cold air contracts the extremities of the body's fibers. This increases their springs and favors the return of blood from the extremities of the heart. So purely biology, he's looking at the physiology of the bodies, our physiology of bodies, and how cold and heat affects the body. Okay, right? It shortens some of therefore, in other words, cold contracts and heat increases the body and the springs, the tissues and springs of the body. It shortens these same fibers, therefore, it increases their strength in a way too. Hot air, in contrast, relaxes these extremities of fibers and lengthens them. Therefore, it decreases the strength of their springs. So he's saying that what happens is that as cold, the body surfaces, the skin gets tougher and it strengthens it. Okay, in the heat, it softens it. It strings the springs out. So that's what he's trying to point out here. Therefore, men are more vigorous in cold climates. The actions of the heart and the reactions of the extremities of the fibers are closer in accord. The fluids are in a better equilibrium. The blood is pushed harder through the heart, and reciprocally, the heart has more power. So therefore, there's even how the heart will, different climates will work in that sense. He's saying the greater strength should produce many effects. For example, confidence in oneself, which is more courage, better knowledge of one's superiority, that is less desire for vengeance, a higher opinion of one's security, that is more frankness and fewer suspicions, maneuvers and tricks. Finally, it should make a very different characters. Put a man in a hot, enclosed spot, and he will suffer, for the reasons just stated, a great slackening of the heart. If, in the circumstance, one proposes a bold action to him, I believe one will find him a little disposed towards it. His present weakness will induce a discouragement of his soul. He will fear everything. Because he will feel that he can do nothing. The peoples in hot climates are like timid old men. These cold country and those in cold countries are courageous like young men. If we turn our attention to the recent wars, and this is the War of Spanish Succession, right? This is turning the Wars of Spanish Succession, and that was fought mostly in the colonies, right? Where which are ones we can best observe, and in which we can better see certain slight effects that are imperceivable from a distance. We shall certainly see that the actions of the northern people who were sent to the southern countries were not as fine as the actions of their compatriots fighting in their own climate, enjoyed enjoyed the whole of their courage. The strengths of the fibers of the northern peoples cause them to draw thickness juices of their food. Two things result from this. First, that the parts of the chai or lymph being broad are more apt to be applied to the fibers and nourish them. Second, that being coarse, they are less apt to give a certain subtlety to the nervous juices. Therefore, these people have large bodies and a little vivacity. Right? The nerves, in other words, he's saying that especially the populations, their way they eat, the things that they do, affects the bodies, and the bodies are going to have the climate and the food and how they do it, and how they get their nutrition from it is going to cause certain changes to behavior. The nerves, which end in the tissue of our skin, are made of a sheaf of nerves. Ordinary, it is not the whole nerve that moves, but an indefinitely small part of it. In hot countries where the tissues of the skin is relaxed, the ends of these nerves are open and are exposed to the weakest action of the slightest objects. In cold countries, the tissue of the skin is contracted and the papillae compressed. The little bunches are in a way paralyzed. Sensation hardly passes to the brain except when it's extremely strong, and the and is of the entire nerve together. But the imagination, taste, and sensitivity and vivacity depends on the infinite number of small sensations. So, therefore, saying that in other words, it's things like imagination, taste, sensitivity, vivacity. These depend on all the little ones. So, therefore, in the warm climates, the thing is exposed, the nerves are exposed. They feel and sense. In the cold climate, they're not, and therefore the whole nerve, right? Therefore, I observed the place on the surface tissue of a sheep's tongue, which appears to the naked eye to be covered with polypi. Although through a microscope, I have seen the tiny hairs or the kind of down on these polypi. Between these polypi were pyramids, forming something like little brushes at the end. And it is very likely that these pyramids are the principal organs of taste. I had half of the tongue frozen, and with the naked eye found that the palpes considerably diminished. Some of the rows of palpes had even slipped inside their sheath. I examined the tissue through a microscope. I could no longer see the pyramids. As the tongue thawed, the palpes appeared again to the naked eye, and under the microscope, the brushes began to reappear. This observation confirms what I've said. In cold countries, the tufts of nerves are less open. They slip inside their sheaths, where they are protected from the actions of external objects. Therefore, sensations are less vivid. So the idea is that because of this, the physiology of the body and the way nerves operate, that in cold climates, the nerves will be the senses that of our nerves will kind of go into our bodies, and therefore the skin. When hot climates, the skin is relaxed, the fishes and the tissues are different. They act differently. Now the question then becomes, what about this is the point where he assumes that the same bodies in those different climates. But what happens over time? Does the body get acclimated to this? I mean, I think this is what some issues that people have, and I think he has addressed it in the sense that what happens is that no, the body doesn't really change that much. What happens is that it just gets used to it, and that becomes the norm of the body expects behavior. So that's that point. In cold countries, one will have little sensitivity to pleasures. One will have more of it in temperate countries, and hot countries, sensitivity will be extreme. As one diminishes climate, say by little degrees of latitude, one can also distinguish them by degrees of sensitivity, so to speak. I have seen operas in England and Italy. They are the same play with the same actors, but the same music produces such different effects on the people of the two nations that seem inconceivable. That one so calm and the other so transported. In other words, he's now some people say, well, isn't that culture? No, his argument is that environment and human nature combined, and the effects of this is what culture is. Culture is not simply just something there created that it's there. Culture is a product of human nature and the biology of human nature and its biology, and the environment, okay, and the actions that are produced from it, and the reactions, also the reactions and things of this. It will be the same for pain. Pain is aroused in us by tearing of some fibers in our bodies. The author of nature has established that this pain is stronger as a disorder, as the disorder is greater. Now it is evident that large bodies and coarse fibers in the northern people are less capable of falling into disorder than delicate fibers of the peoples in south countries. Therefore, the soul is less sensitive to pain. A Muscovite has to be flayed before he feels anything. In other words, he's saying what is, but since the climates will even change how we're receptible to pain and what kind of pain. Okay, and therefore, to understand what's painful, one has to understand the body in relation to the environment and the and and they're adapted to that body in their use. Okay, hence this line about the Muscovite has to be flayed before he feels anything in that sense, right? With the delicacy of organs found in hot country, the soul is sovereign. The soul is sovereignly moved by all that is related to the union of the two sexes. Everything leads to this object. In other words, the warm climate, the senses are thing, the senses are overloading, and therefore the soul, the mind, or this is moved, really ruled by passion and the union of the sexes in the sense. In northern climates, the physical aspect of love has scarcely enough strength to make itself felt. In temperate climates, love accompanied by a thousand accessories is made pleasant by things that at first seem to be love but are still not love. In hotter climates, like one likes love for itself. It is the sole cause of happiness. It is life. In southern climates, a delicate, weak, but sensitive machine gives itself up to love, a love which, in a Sorogo, I mean, this is the harems, right, is constantly aroused and calm, or else to a love which, as it leaves women much more independent, is exposed to a thousand troubles. In northern countries, a healthy and well constituted but heavy machine finds its pleasures in all that can start the spirit in motion again, in hunting, travels, war, wine. You will find in northern climates people who have few vices, yet enough virtues, and much sincerity and frankness. As you move towards the countries of the south, you will believe you have moved away from morality itself. The liveliest passions will increase crime. Each will seek to take from the other all the advantage that can favor these same passions. In temperate countries, you will find people whose manners and even their vices and virtues are inconstant. A climate not sufficiently settled to fix them. The heat of the climate can be so excessive that the body there will be absolutely without strength. So prostration will pass even to the spirit. No curiosity, no noble enterprises, no generous sentiment. Inclinations will all be passive there. Laziness will be happiness. Most chastisements there will be less difficult to bear than the action of the soul, and servitude will be less intolerable than the strength of the spirit necessary to guide their own conduct. So and therefore there's going to be some hot climates, super hot. The climate is going to be so hot. What's that lazy? He says you're going to just be passive. The body will be passive. that prostration itself will pass to the spirit. Makes sense, right? No curiosity, no enterprises. Not going to be inclinations will be passive. Laziness will be happiness, and chastisements will be better than action. Okay, and that's what he said. And therefore, this is what's in other words, and that's how he gives the warning there. So this he's basically given the kind of flushing out of how different climates how affect the physical body and how that therefore affects the spirit. Okay. Chapter 3, the contradiction in the character of certain peoples in the South. Indians, by nature, these Indians are not. Now look at this. Indians here are the European soldiers in India. European soldiers would have little difficulty routing 1,000 Indian soldiers. The Indians are by nature without courage. And even children of Europeans born in the Indians lose their courage of the European climate. But how does this accord with the atrocious actions, right? Their barbaric customs and practices? Men there suffer unbelievable evils. Women burn themselves. This is considerable strength for such weakness. Nature, which has given these people a weakness that makes them timid, has also given them such a lively imagination that everything strikes them to excess. So, therefore, their bodies are passive, but they're because at the same time their senses are feeling everything. That leads to their imaginations being vivid, and therefore it makes them see everything in excess. Right. The same delicacy of organs that makes them fear death serves also to make them dread 1,000 things more than death. The same sensitivity makes the Indian both flee all the perils and brave them. As good education is more necessary to children, those than those to those of mature spirit, so the peoples of these climates have the greater need for a wise legislator than the peoples of our own. So he's saying, in other words, the people in the hot climates actually need wise legislatures who make morals, mores, and things like this than northern people. In other words, you can have, in other words, northern people. The climate gives them certain strengths and positive situations that in southern climates need to be given by lawmakers and lawgivers, the laws. Okay, that's why it's in other words, those are these people. These climates have greater need for wise legislators than the people of our own. The more easily and forcefully one is impressed, the more important it is to be impressed in a suitable manner, to accept no prejudices and to be led by reason. Okay, right? In the time of the Romans, the people of the northern Europe lived without arts, without education, almost without laws, but still with only the good sense connected with the coarse fibers of their climate. They maintained themselves with remarkable wisdom against the Roman power until they came out of their forest to destroy it. In other words, this is the point about it, right? This is when the northern German tribes will eventually destroy the Roman Empire, right? And in other words, Roman had civilization power, but the northern people had even then they were disadvantaged from the purpose of laws and the political structure, but the nature gave them an advantage in a sense. Montesquieu makes the point here. Okay, the cause and mutability of religion, mores, and manners, and the laws in relation to the East. If you enjoin the weakness of organs that makes the people lazy of the East receive the strongest impression of the world to a certain laziness of spirit, naturally bound with that of the body, which makes that spirit incapable of any action and any effort, any application, you will understand that the soul can no longer make and alter impressions once it has received them. This is why laws, mores, and manners, even those that seem not to matter, like fashion in clothing, remain in the East today as they were 1,000 years ago. So, in other words, religion, mores, and manners will play more roles in the East than this. Because of why? Well, because he's saying that the strongest impression in the world of laziest spirits, naturally bound to the body, will make that spirit incapable of any action. Right? This is why. And once that something has impressed upon them something, it will remain. So therefore, these mores, this is why laws, mores, and manners, which will impress on the question, this is what legislators do, right? Give to them. And that once they've been imposed on their character, the body they just don't have an inclination to change it. Okay. Chapter 5. The bad legislature are those who have favored the vices of the climate. The good ones are those who have opposed. So, okay, it starts off. A good legislature would have opposed the vices of the climate. Each climate has vices, and therefore a legislator would oppose it. A good legislature would oppose the vice, and the bad legislature would work with the vice. Indians believe that rest and nothingness are found are the foundation of all things, and the end to which they lead. Therefore, they consider total action as being the perfect state and the object of their desires. They give to the sovereign beings, this is again from their gods, right? The title of the unmoving one. The Siamese believe that the supreme felicity, again, this is the kingdom of Siam, consists in not being obliged to animate a machine or to make a body act. So the supreme felicity is not being able to move, right, or to make action. In these countries where excessive heat invigorates and overwhelms, rest is so delicious and movement so painful that this system of metaphysics appears natural. In Fo, okay, this is Fo wants to reduce the heat to pure emptiness. Father, we have ears, eyes, but perfection consists in not seeing or hearing. Perfection for those members, mouth, hands, is to be inactive. This is taken from the dialogue of the Chinese philosopher, right? So, legislatures of the Indies followed his feelings when he put men in extreme passive states. But his doctrine, born of idleness of the climate, favoring in turn causes 1,000 ills. The legislature of China were more sensible when they considered men not in terms of the peaceful state in which they will one day be, but in terms of the actions proper making them fulfill their duties in life. They made their religion, philosophy, and laws all practical, right? So that's the Indians are more spiritual. The Chinese are more practical. The Chinese legislature was better in this sense because they told them about what the state they would be in versus the state they need to be in to live their lives. Action proper than making them fulfill their duties. They made their religion, philosophy, and all laws practical. The more the physical causes incline men to rest, the more the moral causes should divert them from it. The cultivating the land in hot climates. The cultivation of land is the greatest labor of men. The more their climate inclines them to flee this labor, the more their religion and laws should rouse them to it. Thus, the laws of the Indies, which gives the land to the princes and takes away from individuals the spirit of ownership, increases the bad effect of the climate, that is, natural laziness. So again, this is on monasticism. Chapter 7, monasticism. Monasticism causes the same evil there. It is born in the hot eastern countries where one is given to action less than to speculation. In Asia, the number of dervishes or monks seem to increase with the heat of the climate. In Indies, where it is extremely hot, they are full of them. One finds the same difference in Europe. In order to conquer the laziness that comes from the climate, laws must so I'm going to repeat, I got interrupted again, so this is annoying. In order to conquer the laziness of the climates, laws must seek to take away the very means of living without labor, right? The laws must seek to take away the very means of living. They can't, in other words. But in Southern Europe, they do the opposite. They give to those who want to be idle places proper for the speculative life and attach immense wealth to those places. These people who live in abundance that is burdensome to them correctly give their excess to common people. The common people lost the ownership of the goods. The people are repaid for it by their idleness they enjoy and they come to love their very poverty. This is his explanation of why the southern peoples like Spain and Italy and like this are the passive way they are, is that they're princes and idleness. The monasteries help lead to this, right? Idleness, and therefore that's why it should not be. The monasteries lead to idleness in the southern climates because it reward because working on land is labor. Therefore, you need them to work on the land. You don't want them not work. Okay, and monasteries who talk about speculation and reflection is the opposite of what needs to be done in the climate. Chapter 8, a good custom in China. The accounts of China tell us that the ceremony that the emperor performs every year to open the cultivation of the fields. This, by public and solemn act, one has wanted to rouse the peoples to their plowing. Moreover, each year the emperor is informed of the plowman who most distinguishes himself in his profession and makes him a madron for the eighth order. Improves it, right? Among the ancient Persians, on the eighth day of the month, named Cheremroz, the king would lay aside their pomp and eat with the plowmen. These institutions are remarkable for the courages in agriculture. In other words, the emperor themselves and the king of the Persians would reward those people, plowmen, and they encouraged it. Why? To encourage labor, to encourage work. Okay. Chapter 9, the means of encouraging idleness. I shall show in chapter 19, book 19, that the ordinary lazy nations are arrogant. One could, in turn, affect, cause, and destroy laziness by arrogance. In other words, the ordinary lazy nations are arrogant. One could affect, one could turn effect against cause and destroy laziness by arrogance. In Southern Europe, where people are so impressed by the point of honor, it would be well to give prizes to plowmen who were best cultivating their lands and to the workers who had been most industrious. This practice will succeed in every country. In our time, it was used in Ireland to establish one of the largest textiles mills in Europe. Chapter 10, on the laws related to the sobriety of people. In hot countries, perspiration dissipates much of the watery part of the blood. Like liquid must therefore be substituted. Water is remarkably useful for this. Alcohol beverage would colgate the globules of blood that remain after the disposition of the watery parts. In cold countries, perspiration releases very little of the watery part of the blood. It remains in abundance. Therefore, one can use spirit there without making it blood coagulate. One is full of humors there. Alcoholic beverages give motions to the blood that are suitable. The laws of Muhammad that prohibited the drinking of wine is therefore a law of the climate of Arabia. Thus, before Muhammad, water was the drink of the Arabs. The law prohibits the Carthaginians from drinking wine was also a law of the climate. In effect, the climate of these two countries is about the same. Such a law would not be good for cold countries, where the climate seems to force a certain drunkenness of the nation quite differently from the drunkenness of the person. Drunkenness is found established among the peoples in proportion to the cold and dampness of the climate. As you go from the equator to our pole, you will see drunkenness increase with the degree of latitude. As you go from the same equator to the opposite pole, you will find drunkenness to the south, as on our side of the north. It is natural that the excess should be more severely punished where wine is contrary to the climate and consequent to the health than in countries where drunkenness has a few ills except for the person, few for the society, and does not make men frenzied, but often dull-witted. So therefore, this is a problem. How does alcohol make it? It make it dull-witted. It makes you dull-witted, or it makes you frenzied. Therefore, what is the effect of the person? Does it really affect that health that much? Does it? He's making very arguments how laws should be doing it. Thus, the laws that punish a drunken man, both for the error committed and for the drunkenness, were applicable only to the drunkenness of the person and not to drunkenness of the nation. A German drinks by custom, a Spaniard by choice. In other words, this is this point. right? The Spaniard drinks by choice. The German does it because this culture does the thing. In hot countries, relaxation of the fiber produces a great perspiration of liquids, but solids dissipate less. The fibers, which have only a very weak reaction and little springs, are scarcely used. Little nutritious juices is needed to repair them. Thus, one eats little there, right, in hot climates. The differing needs of these different climates have formed different ways of living, and these different ways of living have formed different sorts of laws. If men communicate much with each other in a nation, there must be certain laws. There must be others for a people where there's no communication. In other words, so therefore, if they're going to be communicating to people like this, they need to have laws about how they behave and how they ritual. Otherwise, if there's no communication, there's no need for the laws. Okay. In other words, different climates need different needs of different climates, right? Then if the people communicating, right, if they have formed by certain laws and habits, if men communicate much with each other in a nation, these different peoples, their climates, then there needs to be certain laws regulating these certain behaviors, so that doesn't produce problems, right? Drinking and things like this. When they don't communicate much, then there's no need for such laws. Chapter 11, on the laws relating to diseases from climate. Herodotus tells us that the laws of the Jews of leprosies were drawn from the practice of the Egyptians. Indeed, the same diseases required the same cures. These laws, as well as the illness, were unknown to the Greeks and to the first Romans. The climate of the Egyptians in Palestine made these laws necessary, and the ease with which the disease spread should make us feel clearly the wisdom and foresight of such laws. We ourselves have suffered the effect of the disease. The Crusades brought us leprosy. Wise rulings were made that prevented it from spreading to the mass of the people. One sees in the laws of the Lombards that this disease was widespread in Italy before the Crusades and deserved the attention of the legislator. Herodotus ordered that a leper driven from his house and be kept in a particular spot could not make disposition of his goods, because he was presumed dead from the moment he was taken from the house. In order to prevent any communication with lepers, they were not allowed to have any possessions. So therefore, this idea of the laws of limit, they will not have communication like this. I think that this disease was brought to Italy by the conquest of the Greek emperors, whose armies may have included militia from Palestine or Egypt. Whatever the case, its progress was checked until the time of the Crusades. It is said that Pompey's soldiers, on returning from Syria, brought back the disease somewhat like leprosy. No regulation made at the time had come down to us, but it is likely that there were some, for this ill was checked until the time of the Lombards. 2 centuries ago, disease unknown to our father traveled from the New World to this one and came to attack human nature at the very source of life and pleasures. Now, this is syphilis, right? This is the New World. The same, most of the important families of Southern Europe were affected by the disease that became so common that it was no longer shameful and was merely deadly. It was the thirst for gold that perpetuated the disease. Men continued their voyages to America and brought back new leaven of it each time they returned. For reasons of pity, one wanted to let this be. The reason for piety, one wanted to let this be the punishment for the crime. But the disaster had entered marriages and has already corrupted the childhood itself. As it is the wisdom of legislatures to keep watch over the health of the citizens, it would have been very sensible to check the spread of the disease by laws made on the plan of the Mosaic Law. In other words, this is punishment, that this plague of this, in that sense, the Mosaic Law. This is very interesting. The Jewish Mosaic Law about how to deal with this punishing, about adultery and about this, The plague is an evil whose ravages are even more prompt and rapid. Its principal seat is in Egypt, from which it spreads over the universe. In most of the states, in most of the states of Europe, very good regulations have been made to prevent its entry, and in our time, a remarkable means have been divided to check it. A line of troops is formed among the infected country, which prevents communication of disease. The Turks, who have no police on these matters, the Turks who have no police and see Christians in the same town escape the danger and themselves alone perish. They buy the clothing of those stricken by the plague, wear it, and go away. The doctrine of a doctrine of a rigid destiny ruling all makes the magistrate a tranquil spectator. He thinks that God has already done everything, and that he himself had nothing to do. So therefore, this is the problem. The Mohammedan, in this sense, that God said, I think I did everything, and God is doing everything. And therefore, they say the Christians flee, and then they God allowed it, right? This is the mistake of this. Chapter 12, on the laws against those who killed themselves. We see in the history that the Romans did not inflict death on themselves without cause. But the English resolved to kill themselves whenever one can imagine no reason for this decision. They killed themselves in the very midst of happiness. Among the Romans, the act was the consequence of education. It comes from their way of thinking and their customs. Among the English, it's affected illness. It comes from the physical. Okay, this is what is it from? This is 24. This is it could be could be complicated by scurvy, which, especially in some countries, makes men eccentric and intolerable to himself. This is Perraud's Voyages. Right? It comes from the physical state of the machine and the independence of other causes. Right? This is in English is it's an illness that's from the physical state of the body and the mind and independent of other causes. Right? The Romans killed themselves out of this culture of honor and respectability. The English has it right. It is likely that there is a failure in the filtering of the nervous juices. The machine, when the forces that give motion to its motion stay inactive, wearies of itself. It is not the pain. It is not the pain the soul feels, but a certain extremity of existence. Pain is a local ill, which inclines us to the desire to see this pain cease. The weight of life is an illness and having no particular place, which inclines us to the desire to see this life end. It is clear that the civil laws of some country have had reasons to stigmatize the murder of oneself, but in England, one can no more punish it than one can punish the effect of madness. So therefore, you can kind of regulate this idea of committing suicide for like this. You can regulate it, but if it's from madness, it's hard to do that. So, is the reason for you commit suicide is this a product of culture or madness? If it's about mores and morals and honor, then it's not so much madness, but rather norms, mores, and norms, and you can regulate that. But if it is madness, you can't regulate. Madness, you can't really ultimately regulate. And he says this, but pain can be moderated and can be, because pain is localized. Weariness of life, what happens is that you want the pain to cease. Well, if life is so worried, life is itself is the thing that has, and there's no particular place of this, right? There's no locality of this. And therefore, you desire to see life end. That's the problem in that sense. Chapter 13. In a nation whose soul is so affected by the illnesses of climate that it could carry the repugnance for all things to include that of life itself, one sees the most suitable government. In other words, it's a nation that is so affected by the illness of the climate that one can carry repugnance for all things, include life itself. One sees that the most suitable government for most people, to those whom everything can be intolerable, would be the one in which they could not be allowed to blame any one person for causing their sorrow, and which the laws rather than men would govern. The laws themselves must be overthrown in order to change the state. So therefore, this is the idea that if they're going to be this climate, that this whole thing, you need something that is not that it's very difficult to, who can be blamed. In other words, civil government for people would be everything to whom everything intolerable would be the one in which they could not be allowed to blame any one person for their sorrows, and that the laws themselves would govern, and the laws themselves must be overthrown. For if the same nation had also received from a climate a certain characteristic of patience that did not permit it to tolerate the same things for long, it can be seen that the government of which we have just spoken of would be still the most suitable, or even their impatience. The character of impatience is the characteristic of impatience is not serious in itself, but it can become. Now, this is what is it? This is what chapter? This is the results reflecting from the climate of England. Right? This is much when it's negative words. The impatience is not serious, but it can become very, very much so when joined to courage. If in its different, it is different from fickleness. So what is he saying here about this impatience versus fickleness? It is different from fickleness, which makes one undertake things without purpose and abandon them likewise. It is nearer to obstinacy because it comes from feeling ills it comes from a feeling of ills which is so lively that it is not weakened even by the habit of tolerating them. So obstinance is like, okay, I'm going to obstinacy, which is something I don't like. I'm going to just, but stubborn, right? That's a feeling of ills that are so lively that is not taught. In a free nation, this characteristic would be this idea of impatience, right, and all these other things, right? In a free nation, this characteristic be one apt to frustrate the projects of tyranny. So this impatience he's talking about is frustrate the project of tyranny, which is always slow and weak in the beginning, just as it is prompt and lively at its end, which shows at first only a hand extended in aid and later oppresses with an infinity of arms. So therefore, in a free people, this impatience is what would frustrate tyranny. Servitude always begins with drowsiness, but a people who rests in no situation, the people who rest in no situation, who constantly pinch themselves to find a painful spot, will scarcely fall asleep. So therefore, the impatience. What is this? The English has a thing. Their climate is so lucky. What is this? Their climate is so lucky. Their souls are kind of things. So therefore, uh, 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 they rule by law. They make it is that everything is the blame. So they don't want to have any one person to blame. So they create laws and rules are up here. This person is also tied with characteristic impatience. For the same reason, this climate as impatience, right? And it describes what impatience is. And that therefore this idea is that servitude begins with drowsiness, right? But a people whose rest in no situation who constantly pinch themselves to find the painful spots they could scarcely fall asleep. Politics is a dull rasp which by slowly grinding away gains its ends. So now in men to whom we've just spoken could not support the delays, the details, and the coolness of negotiations. They would often succeed in them less well. They would often succeed in them less well than any other nation. But when they lose by their and they would lose by their treaties what they gained by their weapons. This is more interesting. That their impatience, their things. The English is this something impatient. They will ultimately they'll be successful. They'll achieve things because of their courage and their daring. But they're impatient, and because they're impatient, they will what they've won by their daring and their weapons, they will lose out in their negotiations. Because politics is a dull rasp grinding away towards its end. Chapter 14, the other effects of climate. Our fathers, the ancient Germans, lived in a climate where the passions were calm. Their laws found in things only that as what they saw. They imagined nothing more. And just as these laws judge insults to men by the size of the wound, they put no great refinement in the offense of women's. The laws of the Illuminae on this point is quite singular. If a woman expose, if a woman, if one exposes Illumini, I think Illumini is what? Oh yeah, these are laws. Okay. On this point, if one exposes a woman's head, one will pay a fine of 6 sous. It is the same for exposing a leg up to the knee, double above the knee. The law, it seems, measures the size of the outrage done by a woman person as a measure of geometric feature. The law did not punish the crime of the imagination; it punished that of the eyes. But when a Germanic nation moved to Spain, the climate required different laws. The laws of the Visigoths prohibited doctors from bleeding a freeborn woman except in the presence of her father or mother, her brother, her son, or her uncle. The imagination of the people were fired, and that of the legislature likewise ignited. The law suspected everything in a people capable of suspecting everything. Therefore, these laws gave an extreme attention to the 2 sexes. But it seems that in their punishing they thought more of gratifying individual vengeance than of examining public vengeance. Thus, in the most cases, they reduced the two guilty ones to the servitude of their relatives or the offended husband. A freeborn woman who had given herself to a married man was put to the power of his wife to do what she wanted. These laws required that slaves bind up and present to the husband his wife, whom they had caught in adultery. They permitted her children to accuse her, and they permitted torturing her slaves in order to convict her. Thus, these laws were more proper for a excessive refinement of a certain point of honor than for the formation of a good police. In other words, this is about honor, the way that this was all satisfying honor. This is more about the good police of establishing good habits and good mores. Right? This is the word in police. Police means in Montesquieu this idea of good behavior, good manners, right? Good morals. And one must not be astonished if Count Julian believed an outrage of this kind required the loss of one's country or one's king, right? So Julian, this happened that one should not be surprised at the Moors, whose Moors were so different, whose Moors were so different, right, found it so easy to establish themselves in Spain, to maintain themselves there, and to delay the fall of their empire. So therefore, as the Moors stable them, they were able to be more moderate. They had a police about this, and therefore honor was maintained. So this is the very important instruction about honor. Chapter 15 on the differing trust the laws have in people according to their climate. The Japanese people have such an atrocious character that their legislators and magistrates, in fact, look at the Japanese, okay? Look at enemy and go look at Japanese culture. And this is what he's saying, right? The atrocious character of that their legislatures and magistrates had not been able to place any trust in them. They have set before the eyes of the people only judges, threats, and chastisements. They have subjected them at every step to the inquisition of the police. They had to enforce them, everything. These laws establish in every 5 heads of families, one as magistrate over the other 4. These laws that punish a whole family or a whole neighborhood for a single crime. These laws that find no innocent man where there can be a guilty one, are made so that all men distrust one another, so that each scrutinize the conduct of the other, so that each is his own inspector, witness, and judge. That's the Japanese, right? The Japanese and how they did it, right? Now, on the other hand, the people of the Indies are gentle, tender, and compassionate. Thus, their legislature have put great trust in them. They have established few penalties, and these are not very severe or even strictly executed. They have given nephews to uncles and orphans to guardians, as elsewhere they have given to their fathers. They have regulated inheritance by recognizing the merit of the heir. It seems that they have thought each citizen should rely on the goodness of others. They they easily give liberty to their slaves. They marry them. They treat them like their children. Happy is the climate that gives birth to both candor, mores, and produces gentleness and laws. And that's how he ends it on that point there. Well, I'm going to stop here on this point. This is where we end it. If you have any questions or comments or themes, the thing you talk about the climate here, and it's something you thought interesting, please put it there, and I will respond to it. This next time when we meet, we will look at chapter 15, which I think we'll talk about slaves and climates. We'll talk about slaves, I think. Yeah. Then, if you have any comments, please put them down there about this climate and issues and about these other things, and I will respond to them and see them. Okay. If you liked it, like it, share it with a friend, share it on social media, put it out there. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. Like the grow numbers. Please encourage other people to subscribe. Also, another thing is, if you didn't like it, you can say you didn't like it and say why you didn't like it. Maybe I was too rushed. I'm under a deadline, so I'm kind of like rushing today a little bit. So maybe I was, if the deadline wasn't kind of like, I had some issues on the computer, and therefore I fought with the computer today, and therefore okay. So, but say why. Maybe you can learn from it. Okay. If you want to follow me on social media, the links are below. If you want to help me do what I do and continue doing what I do, and it would be nice if someone does these things, you can do Patreon or Subscribe Star, listed below. Or you could buy my books that are listed below. Listed books. The Lulu book is more interesting, but it's not about this topic, so maybe it wouldn't be relevant. On this point, I'm going to stop. Again, these postings are usually on Monday, Wednesdays, and the general topic on something else on Tuesday, Thursdays, and live streams are on Friday when we have live streams. Well, that's it. Okay, take care and have a good one. Bye bye.